The latest Quebec's election campaign officially kicks off on Thursday, and for the first time in 40 years, sovereignty isn't a defining issue. Philippe Couillard's governing Liberals are competing against the Coalition Avenir Québec and the Parti Qu. Most polls put the center-right populist CAQ in the lead, but the end result on October 1st is anyone's guess. The federal Conservatives and Liberals are taking no official stand in the race, though the Tories are finding lots of common ground with the CAQ, the Globe's Daniel LeBlanc explains. Who's who, the parties and their leaders. Liberals leader, Philippe Couillard. Aside from an 18-month interlude of PQ rule, the Liberals have governed Quebec for the past 15 years. Philippe Couillard, a former neurosurgeon, inherited the leadership after corruption scandals and student anti-austerity protests helped topple his predecessor, Jean Charest, in the 2012 provincial election. But in 2014, Mr. Couillard brought the Federalist Party back into power on a message of stability. Now, after 4 years of healthy growth and declining unemployment, Mr. Couillard is trying to persuade Quebecers that economic good times will continue under a re-elected Liberal government. Coalition Avenir Québec, co-founded by former PQ cabinet minister François Legault in 2011, the CAQ is a centre-right populist party that brought together Quebec nationalists, federalists and the last remnants of an earlier populist party, the Action Démocratique du Québec, ADQ. The CAQ has been leading the polls for months ahead of the 2018 campaign, though the CAQ and ADQ have seen races before where their strong leads collapsed by election day. Mr. Legault, a former airline executive, is positioning himself as the change candidate and playing up his business credentials, promising to be the economic premier. Parti Québécois leader, Jean-François. Since Premier Pauline Marois' defeat in 2014, the PQ has come to be seen as a spent force in a province where young people are less and less interested in the sovereignty question. The last election gave the Separatist Party its fewest seats in 25 years, and its poll numbers have not improved under Ms. Marois' embattled successor, Jean-François. The PQ leader has so far concentrated his rhetoric against the CAQ, arguing that its promises of change are all flash and that voters will prefer the PQ's conviction and credibility on election day. Quebec Solidaire spokespeople, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois and Manon Massé. The left-wing Souverainist Party has only 3 seats in the National Assembly, but if they win a few more from PQ ridings, they could be influential players in a minority government scenario. The party doesn't have a leader in the traditional sense, only 2 spokespeople, 1 female, feminist activist Manon Massé, and 1 male, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, one of the former leaders of the 2012 student protests. 5 charts you should look at before you vote. 1. Immigration for Quebec's municipalities and businesses. Immigration is a lifeline. Worker shortages, a low birth rate and an aging population have made the province increasingly dependent on skilled workers from overseas. But for Quebec's politicians, immigration is a hot-button issue that divides people along questions of language, integration and national identity. The CAQ is taking a hard line, proposing to cut immigration quotas from 50,000 people per year to 40,000 and to expel immigrants who fail a test of Quebec values. The Liberals plan to raise the immigration quota to 60,000 people per year. Mr. Couillard's tenure as premier began with drastic cuts to public spending in an effort to bring Quebec's debt levels, among the highest in Canada, under control. Deficits turned into 3 years of surpluses, but critics said the austerity measures for health and education were harming students, seniors and the sick. Then, 6 months before the election, the Liberals' latest budget brought spending up 5.2%, the largest increase in a decade, with promises of new money for education and hospitals. Mr. Legault, meanwhile, is promising government efficiencies that will put more money into Quebecers' pockets. 3. Trade. In the time of Trump, Quebec's campaign begins amid a long-running and painful tariff feud between the Trump administration and many of its traditional trade allies, including its NAFTA partners, Canada and Mexico. Quebec has a lot riding on talks to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement. Its large and lucrative dairy industry has long benefited from the supply management regime that the Trump administration wants to abolish, and its businesses, which depend on the United States for more than 70% of the province's exports, have been hit by punitive U.S. tariffs on steel, aluminum and scores of everyday products. The Couillard government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars to shield the province from those tariffs. The challenge for Mr. Legault, whose anti-establishment nationalism has earned him comparisons to Donald Trump himself, is to persuade Quebecers that he can better navigate the province through the trade conflict than Mr. Couillard can. Compared with the rest of Canada, Quebec's pupils have been doing well in recent years. In 2016, Quebec was the only province above the national average in standardized grade 8/secondary 2 math tests, and next to pay, it saw the biggest improvements in math and reading scores. But in this election, Quebecers are getting very different options for how the province's schools should be run. The CAQ wants to abolish school boards entirely, replacing them with regional service centers that they say will save money. The Liberals considered similar measures a few years ago, but abandoned the plan amid outcry from Anglo-Quebecers who see the 9 Anglophone boards as a vital defense of minority language rights. Now, Mr. Couillard is running on a promise to keep the school boards. If Quebec's opposition parties are looking for an issue to galvanize voters to change, sovereignty isn't it. Polls like the one cited above suggest support for Quebec's separation from Canada has waned to historic lows. But in this election, for the first time in 4 decades, Quebecers are getting a break on the sovereignty debate. Even the PQ is promising it won't hold a referendum until after the next election in 2022. That frees up voters and politicians alike to try new approaches that could change the province's political landscape, the Globe Slay-Perros explains. How to vote, a primer. Am I eligible to vote? You can vote if you're a Canadian citizen, aged 18 or older, who has lived in Quebec since April 1st. If this is your first time voting, you'll need to register before October 1st. If you're already registered, you should get an information card in the mail explaining what to do, and then a reminder card shortly before Election Day. Who am I voting for? Search here to find your riding and the list of candidates there. The final list should be available 2 weeks after the election is called. When and where do I vote? Your information card should say where your riding's polling place is. Advance polls are on September 23rd to 24th, and there's time to vote at your returning officer's office on September 21st to 22nd and September 25th to 27th. On Election Day, polls open at 9:30 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. What ID should I bring to vote? Accepted forms of identification include driver's licenses, health cards, passports, Indigenous status cards or Canadian Forces ID cards. When do I know who wins? There are 125 National Assembly seats up for grabs, and a party needs 63 of them to form majority. Minority governments are rare in Quebec, there have been only 3 in the province's history, but if it happens this year, it could be hours or days before we know who the premier will be. On election night, check back at globeandmail.com for the latest news. Editorial: Quebec's election offers an exciting chance to look forward, so long as one nationalist fixation doesn't replace another.